Hello, Internet, and welcome to this my long promised How to Road Trip America video. I realize this will probably to a certain degree be a bit boring for my American audience, but I hope you will bear with me. Maybe, hell, maybe even you can get something out of it, but this is primarily, of course, for those who want to come in from other countries and don't know very much about how to go about it or want some advice on how to go about it. If any Americans get anything positive out of it, that is absolutely fine. So enjoy. Before any road trip can start, you will, of course, need to actually get to where you want to sort of begin in America. I'm not going to go very much into details about, for European audience, what kind of planes you want to take or how you're going to go over there. I just want to remind you all that if you are part of the ESTAS program, you need to be prepared to have your Estes with you. If not, you need to look into the whole visa situation. Generally, it shouldn't be a major issue to get in for a week or two, maybe three of road tripping. But hell, just to be on the safe side, make sure your visa is in order. There's nothing more annoying than buying a lot of expensive tickets and planning everything, going over there, and then being kicked out in immigrations. Another bit of advice: when you do apply for the ESTAS, please try to find it by your local American embassy. They will have the official link to the ESTAS application form. You will have to pay a small fee, $18, I think, at the current moment. But there are several sites out there who purports to do the whole Estes application thing for you. And most often they do, but they also take a very large fee for actually doing it. If you're doing it yourself, and it's basically just fill in three or four, you know, areas with name and passport numbers and so on the official site, you can settle for the very few dollars. If you do it by some other company, it can cost up to 100. So don't get ripped off, guys. This is really easy to do, and it's something that you should be able to do on your own in about 10 minutes. It doesn't take any longer than that. Nor am I going to go into much detail about actually planning the trip right now. I will give a few examples of how a road trip could be planned at the tail end of this video. Just be aware that going over there and just driving into the ether is funny and is fun and all, but having at least some plan of where you want to start and where you want to end up is probably very relevant regarding, trip back home and where to give up your rental car unless you're actually planning on buying one. That is an opportunity. We have never done it, and I don't know how to go about it. So make a plan, get a rental car, and let's get going. First things first, this is a road trip. Get a decent car. If you're renting from Europe, you should at least try to get a full size. Upgrade if you have the money for it, but a full size is absolutely fine. They usually have decent trunk space, though you might be a bit surprised at how much smaller the baggage capacity is in certain American cars compared to cars found in the rest of the world. But as a general rule, rent a full-size car and you will be fine. The mileage and gas capacity has risen sharply in the last 20 years I have been doing this. Well, 17 years I have been doing this. And it is by now not actually very far below that of European style mileage you can get out of a gallon of petrol, especially also since the American petrol prices are usually very much lower than the ones you can find in Europe. So full-size car, Chevy Impala, or something similar is what we usually take, and they serve us very well with good amount of cabin space so you don't get tired on long driving stints. Now, you got a car. Let's get going out on the road. Quick word about roads. There are various road classifications in America, from highways, be they interstate or state highways or county highways, over various smaller roads to, county roads to city streets to whatever. Getting a little bit of exploration on Wikipedia before you go, so you have a certain idea of how the road system work, is usually always a good idea, so you can sort of see, okay, I'm here If I need to go there, then blah, 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 blah. Everything works together. As a general rule, I will say that if you have a stint where you just want to go fast, go for the highways, particularly the interstate highways. If you actually want to see something, get out on, at the very least, the state highways, or possibly even better, some of the smaller by roads just going around. But as just a driving area, the big interstate highways are a very, very well designed and very, very well maintained road network for getting around in the American landscape. A special thing worth noticing in America, particularly regarding the highway system, is toll roads or pay roads. Now, having to pay for various roads is nothing new, and it's not necessarily a problem in any way. However, America does have the problem that it's almost all on a state-to-state basis on how you pay, especially since more and more toll roads are dispensing with the ability to pay in cash, and instead have implemented a electronic pay system with various sort of electronic pay systems. And the problem is these are not all over the country. As I said, they are implemented on a state-by-state basis. So if you're moving through different states, as many people would do on a large road trip, the one you might have acquired to use in Colorado will certainly not work in Washington state. So be aware of that. There are ways to get around it. Usually, if you don't actually have the payment system, the toll gate will take a picture of your license plate and send you a bill. However, again, there be aware that they will, if you have a rental car, send it to the rental car company, and they will, in all probability, very happily pay the toll for you. Again, they will do that for a fee, and you can well be put in a situation where the toll is less than $1, but you might end up having to pay between $5 and $10 for it once the car rental company have taken their payment fee, so to speak. So be aware of that and try to see perhaps if you can avoid toll roads if you cannot be certain that there is a cash or perhaps credit card payment option. The prices themselves are usually very low, although they rise somewhat spectacularly around certain cities. We have been very surprised, for instance, around New York, where we thought we might have to pay a few bucks and almost had to spend $20 to get from New Jersey into New York City. Regarding food for your car, fuel is available almost anywhere. If you're driving on a highway, for instance, if you're out in the wild desert areas, it can take a while, but at least at any town or city, there are plenty of gas stations to go in and fill up on. It's worth noticing that unlike most places in Europe, diesel is more expensive than petrol in the United States of America, so renting a diesel car is not economically as viable a thing as it would have been in a European country. But otherwise, the gas prices are currently somewhat reasonable, it seems. As always, you will find that the prices rise the higher you get towards the various coasts, and will be, of course, cheaper in the center of the country, and perhaps to a certain degree, particularly in the south of the country. That has at least often been my experience. Also, a quick advice to my European, particularly perhaps my Northern European audience. Unlike in several European countries, trucks, no matter the size, are not limited to speeds slower than personal cars in most highway areas. So don't be surprised if a very big truck suddenly comes up on your left and thunders past. Nothing is actually wrong with that. Just be aware that you will probably have to look over both shoulders to check out for trucks as well. Just a small detail. Of course, to most continental Europeans who are used to driving stick, you of course have to get a quick used to the fact that almost no rental cars in America will have a manual transmission. Everything will be on automatic. So perhaps just look into how an automatic gear shift works before you get into the car. It's really really easy. However, if you sort of don't control your feet and your hands, there it can lead to certain amusing situations, because in an automatic transmission you don't have to use your left foot at all, which needs to take a little bit of practice before you start pressing various pedals at the same time. And of course, actually changing the gear position can lead to several, well, almost disastrous consequences if you shift out of drive while you think you are sort of trying to shift into upper gear. But again, after about an hour on the road, that usually sits in the sort of don't think about it anymore category, because of course driving without manual transmission is as easy as anything. Perhaps it's more like actually having driven for 2 or 3 weeks with an automatic and then coming back home and shifting back into your manual car at home. That can lead to some amusing consequences from time to time. So, you have your car, you sort of have an idea of how the road system works, you know how to get around toll roads, and you know how to fuel. So, what's next? Well, getting around, I suppose, is the point. Navigation. Now, as I have mentioned several times before, and will again later in this video, trying to get lost is also a very good way of actually seeing stuff. However, from time to time you actually need to know where you want to go. For instance, if you ordered a hotel from home that you absolutely have to stay on, or whatever. So how do you get around? Well, GPS, of course, is the most obvious solution, and it works really well, at least on the major roads. Well, it actually works really well on the minor roads as well, though you can get into situations where the GPS simply doesn't show the road you're driving on because apparently it doesn't exist. However, GPS, of course, has the same failures in America as it has anywhere else. If a road has shifted or if there's road work or anything else, it does have a tendency to try to get you into situations where you don't want to or really, really, really shouldn't go. So bring a couple of maps as well. We really like our trusty Rand McNally map of the full United States. However, that does primarily show major roads and city maps. So out in the countryside, it's a bit less useful. So what you might want to do is when you drive into a new state to visit, or for that matter, a new county, to visit a visitor center. Often they can be found going into a new state on the interstate highway just after the state border, and in various county seats you can also find a county visitor center. There you can get a variety of smaller and more local maps, and also ideas of what to see and do in the given area. So yeah, use GPS for the bigger stuff when you absolutely just have to get to a already known point. But when you're out actually just taking a look around, or if you want to see stuff that you otherwise probably wouldn't see from the interstate highways, try to work with maps. Just we found a sort of very interesting meteor crater once because we basically just saw it on the map and decided that that would be interesting to visit. Something we would have never seen if we just drove our GPS between our starting and our end point. So, you're out on the road, you know how to get around, you know where to go and whatever. So what do you bring with you? Well, you need some supplies for your road trip, and you can bring various things. But one thing I feel like you must always have in your car is a cooler or an ice box with water in it. America, again, for those of our European descent here of viewers, is a deceptively warm and humid country in the summer. And it would be often the summer or late spring that people would take road trips. That's not the only part of year you can do it, but there are some places you simply cannot get around to during winter because of, well, heavy snowfall. So most of these advice will be based on you going during warmer seasons. And again, even in the sort of greener areas outside the desert, America can get very warm by European standards, or at least by European standards if you're not from the southernmost nations around there. So anyway, bring the cooler, buy some ice cubes, and fill it up with water. Compared to Denmark or other particularly northern European countries, water can be very, very cheap. Go to a Walmart and you can get a package of 32 half liter water bottles for maybe, I don't know, $2.50, which is approximately €2. So yeah, it will cost more if you try to buy on gas stations and so on, but like I said, water can be very, very cheap if you know where to get it, and having water in your car is an absolute must. Both so if you need to get out and walk to see stuff where it can be very warm and very, well, humid from time to time, and of course also just to keep in the car to keep you hydrated on the long driving stints. Another thing you might want to have in your car is, for instance, a little bit of food. Again, you can keep a lot of that in the cooler box. You can get lunch at various restaurants almost anywhere, but sometimes you're just driving, as I said, in the desert for about 4 hours, or you're out seeing stuff and you don't really want to pay overprice for what is available at your local cafeteria. So what we often do is just to buy some bread and some, pieces of meat at a local grocery store or at a Walmart, and just keep it around to have a little sandwich whenever necessary. Again, it's not necessarily always the most exciting food, but it again will keep you going. Nothing as annoying as being stuck in the middle of the western deserts areas with 100 miles to literally anywhere and being very hungry without having anything around to eat. Well, time for some food. Now, there are various kinds of ways to get food in America. Of course, you can make it yourself. Most motel rooms will actually come with a little kitchenette where you can prepare whatever small food you have available to you. But again, this is a road trip, this is a vacation. So yeah, let's go to a few restaurants from time to time. America is probably the absolute home of chain restaurants. All the ones we know from Europe, McDonald's, Burger King, etc. are there. But honestly, I much prefer some of those that are perhaps a little bit more sit down and eat stuff rather than the more fast foody McDonald's thing. There are various kinds of these restaurants: Hardee's, Carl Jr.'s. We often use a place called Applebee's, not because it's that much better than any of the others, but because of their rather nice 2 for $20 offer, where you get a fairly big starter to share and then 2 main courses for $20 overall. So again, you can eat fairly cheap there and get some good food. Again, there are breakfast restaurants, dinner restaurants, lunch restaurants, whatever. Again, I will leave you all to discover the chain restaurants available. However, if you actually want really good food, you will of course have to try to see what you can find of local restaurants around. Depending on where you are, that can be somewhat difficult, it can be somewhat easy, they can be really good, they can be really bad, as well as anywhere else. However, finding a place to eat is not necessarily going to be difficult, and very often, if you stay at various hotels or motels, they will either have a chain restaurant on the ground or at least in the given area, and most of the finer hotels will of course have a restaurant attached to the actual hotel. As I mentioned before to our European friends who might watch this video, when Americans say that something is to share, they mean it. Don't be surprised if a dish that in Europe you might need 2 of to get full, you probably couldn't even eat up for the same price in America. Americans like big portions, and just be aware of that so you don't suddenly order a starter for everyone and a main course for everyone, and then suddenly everyone is basically just sharing one starter and not eating anything else because they have already eaten too much at this juncture. I mentioned the 2 for $20 offer at Applebee's before. Say, instance, me and my dad usually buy some zesty, spicy chicken wings, usually boneless chicken wings, but basically you get almost a 20 chicken wings for a shared starter. So yeah, just be aware of that particular situation so you don't pay for stuff you are not actually going to be able to eat. Overall, though, in case you don't run amok and go to the most expensive restaurants you can find, eating out in America is a cheap and, if not healthy, then at least filling experience. And don't worry about it. Go do that. American food is also part of the road trip experience and something you should not cheat yourself out of by worry. All that aside, where to sleep, where to stay? Well, if you're in one of the bigger cities, a hotel would, of course, often be useful. They can be fairly expensive towards various city cores, but I mean, if you are over there to try to watch a larger city, for instance, if you visit Washington, D.C., or Los Angeles or San Francisco, getting a centrally placed hotel will, of course, be a lot easier than living in the outskirts when you want to go out and see stuff, especially since if you're in one of the bigger cities, you would most likely be leaving your car at the hotel to do walking or train or buses or whatever other transportation might be available to you in those particular cities. You can, of course, also do camping or rent a recreational vehicle, a camper van, I think most Europeans would call it. There are various places to park such a RV almost all over the country, and it can be a very practical way of seeing stuff. Personally, though, since we really like to be able to go wherever we want, and there are places where such a large vehicle is just going to be very difficult to maneuver around, it's not something that we have ever really done, but it's certainly a possibility, and just the ability to stop almost anywhere and sleep in your own vehicle can, of course, be very practical if you're just going around out in the countryside. American bed and breakfast range in quality, but one thing that differentiates them from many places, at least in continental Europe, is that they are actually from time to time fairly expensive and fairly high class, often being housed in large private and often historical homes and so on. So that can definitely be worth the experience, but you also need to be aware that it often is something you need to, if you want quality, you got to pay for quality, and that certainly takes place in this particular situation. Personally, in the bigger cities, we do prefer to find a relatively cheap, centrally placed hotel of whatever chain we think will be useful at that time. But mostly, we sleep in the highway motels, chains like Quality Inn or Comfort Inn or Best Western or Red Roof Inn or whatever. There are many days in Super 8, etc., etc. They are everywhere on the outskirts of larger cities. There are one in almost every smaller town. They are at almost every time you can get off an interstate, you can very often find a motel. They are everywhere. Their quality, of course, and price level also ranges from the "you don't ever want to come back here again" to the this was actually okay. On our first trips, we usually stayed at Best Western, though in the later years, we generally feel like their prices have become a bit more unreasonable than most, without any particular kind of rise in quality of rooms or anything else. We spent a lot of time in various trips on the discount chain Days Inn, which is absolutely okay if you just want to stay the night somewhere. However, their internet connections are often very sketchy, and in latter years we have started to spend a lot more time on the Quality Inn chains. However, many of these chains are actually owned by the same corporations, and some of them might be franchises, some of them might be centrally controlled, so perhaps look into that a bit. However, if you're just out out and about, just find yourself a motorway, motel. The rooms are usually clean. If not, just check, basically, have them clean it up again, to be perfectly honest. They can be fairly reasonable in prices, usually ranging from around, well, if there's more than one of you, from around $70 to around $110 per night. My advice is to shop around a bit, perhaps on the internet, before you arrive at your given site to see what you can find, or just run around and check what you want to use. If you just want to stay there for one night, almost anywhere will do, to be perfectly honest. Like I said, right now I can sort of say that the quality in chain works really well, but who knows what that will do in 2018 when our next major road trip is planned. All right, all this said and done, why should you take an American road trip overall? Well, as I have mentioned in many other videos, because there are so much stuff to see. Be it ancient American Indian ruins, being historical stuff, being nature, being whatever. There's a large number of larger cities, each with its own personality. What I like about America is that you can basically in one country see practically anything that you can see anywhere else. You can go visit the various national parks. Actually, a bit of advice: entrance to the national parks usually cost a fee per car if you're driving in there, but you can buy a year pass for about $80. If you plan on going to various national parks, buying one of those can be very, very efficient, because basically if you just visit 2 or 3 national parks, or for instance, if you want to go back into a national park more than once, 4 or 5 visits and it will be more than earned back in missed, entrance fees. My various things to see videos or road trip diaries will tell you more about particular things you can see in various places. But here I'm just going to give you a short list of stuff to see in America that, well, it covers almost anything. The Montezuma's Castle Indian ruins and the High Mesa Old Pueblo Indian ruins is of that thing. There is nature, there is the Yellowstone National Park, there is the amazing forested mountain areas of the Appalachians and Blue Ridge mountain areas. There are the driving roads of California 1 and Blue Ridge Parkway. There are the magnificence of the Grand Canyon, the lonely glory of the desert areas, the sort of rather wild coastlines both east and west. There are the huge, amazing cities to watch, be they the sprawling Los Angeles or the, of course, very built-up metro jungle of New York, or the St. Louis or Seattle or Chicago, Miami, New Orleans, all of them with their own personalities, definitely worth seeing. You can go watch factories where Tabasco is being produced. You can watch the hotels of ancient years that are still being in use. You can watch museums of yarn. You can go whale watching. You can try to find cougars in the wild. There is nothing there you absolutely cannot see. My advice that I have mentioned so many times before is that if you're not driving after anything particular, try to switch off your GPS, put away your map, and then just turn your car onto a road you don't know and just go. Try to see if you can get a bit lost for a few hours. You will probably undoubtedly run into something that you would not otherwise have seen, but that you afterwards would be very, very sorry to lose. We have found gem mines like that. As I mentioned, we have found, to a certain degree, meteor craters. We have found Amish people in central North Carolina that was fun to to check out, since of course at that time we thought they were mostly centered up in Pennsylvania. There is so much to see. Again, you can plan for everything from home, but this is a road trip. It does depend a certain bit of spontaneity. So yeah, try to get lost, try to see stuff you otherwise wouldn't see. That is the way of the road trip. Final advice when about driving is that, particularly when you're doing interstate driving, it can get very dull and very boring to drive in America. A lot of roads are very, very straight, and while there are things to see, particularly out west, the country, or perhaps also, of course, in the Midwest, the countryside can get very similar to itself very, very quickly. My advice to you is to try to see if you can keep your driver stints to about 2 hours or less. Drink plenty of water. If there's more than one person in the car, you can then switch out so one person doesn't do all the driving. Drink water, get some food, take a rest now and again to stretch your legs, and just keep concentration. Other than that, perhaps try to see if you can find something to do. We have a little game where we have some trucking companies that we pay attention to and try to see how many of their trucks we can see on any given day. Usually that runs up to about maybe 50 or 60 on interstate driving, and that keeps us sort of on our toes so we don't fall asleep behind the wheel or get fixated on whatever happens as you just drive around in the somewhat featureless desert. But overall, this is road trip is something you need to do, something everyone need to do, and I hope that this video has at least given you some ideas of what to do, how to do, and so on. I again hope you enjoyed it. Some of you, of course, who live in the United States will know a lot of this already, and I'm sorry to have bored you with this. Of course, no one actually forced you to watch me blather on for half an hour about how to road trip in America. So if you did do it, I don't know how sorry I actually am, but I hope you got something out of it anyway. For those of my European friends, I truly do hope this might have inspired you to actually do some American road tripping. It's something I feel you must do just at least once in your life because it is amazing. Along with this video, I'm going to try to upload another one with one or two examples of how a road trip can be planned from home, with a few ideas of perhaps what to see on that particular trip. So until next time, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.